Mike, you've got to be the single happiest and most vindicated man possibly to ever live on this planet. I'm proud of you, buddy. And what an incredible day.
It sure is. I'd like to say happy is the word, but it's also very heavy. And there's a weight of history, and I hope folks appreciate the the historical magnitude of what's happening, and also appreciate the weight of the task of carrying this through to completion. Uh, what we're doing right now is open heart surgery on the entire structure of the American empire and the American foreign policy establishment. And it's essential that as we do this, we don't kill the patient in the process, or accidentally glob on, uh, you know, three arms where the heart should have been. This has to be done well. It has to be done intelligently. We do have to have this wrecking ball moment, but it's imperative that folks in Trump world, at the top of our foreign policy establishment now, have, their eyes are open about what USAID really is, and so they can make intelligent decisions about how to actually restructure its work as they go about the process of chopping down this tree.
Okay, so let's start from the very tip top. So you went viral this weekend by exposing that USAID prosecutors, not Soros prosecutors, were the ones behind President Trump's political persecution in the courts. Can you please unpack that? Because I think that's something that's going to strike kind of at the heart of the issue here, which is that USAID was not about providing aid for starving people in Africa. It was actually about statecraft, and it was about usurping and using malign tools in order to craft the political outcomes that were desirous of a globalist regime. And the Trump prosecutions, I think, are just a perfect centerpiece for all of this. Can you unpack that to start off with, Mike?
Yes. Now, let me be clear that that money, I think that Mario tweet was well intentioned. It slightly missed the mark in the sense that the
We'll get
technical
your tweet up. Yes, get Mike's tweet.
the technical distinction here is that the money went to the fiscal sponsor of the group controlling Soros prosecutors, and there's bleed over between the fiscal sponsor and the 501c3 project. See, Soros funds 30% now at this point. 30% of America's population lives under Soros prosecutors in all the big cities. And not only do they fund the campaigns, but they also fund the NGOs that direct the prosecutors in terms of who to prosecute, who not to prosecute, what laws to enforce and not enforce. These NGOs even write the prosecutors press release statements, social media posts, meet with them on daily and weekly bases in order to essentially, have a rent a prosecutor at their disposal to weaponize the criminal justice system. And so the main group that does that, the main Soros group that does that, is called Fair and Just Prosecutions, FJP. Now, FJP is a 501c3, but not directly. It's a project of a group called the Tide Center. The Tide Center is also the central clearinghouse for Black Lives Matter, for what it's worth. And when you understand USAID's role in racial rent-a riots, that will make a lot more sense to you as to why that is. But USAID paid the Tide Center, which is, again, gives the Soros Prosecutor Control Group, its 501c3, $27 million in one grant alone. And in that grant description, it deputizes the Tide Center to, quote, solicit concrete commitments from foreign governments. Basically, USAID goes out and pays this group to act as a shadow diplomacy to secure commitments from foreign governments to the U.S. government. So this is classic USAID stuff to control domestic politics. What they do is they fund international organizations who then turn around and use that money to manipulate domestic politics. So that's how USAID gets away with it. They keep this firewall. They say, well, we're not funding them to do work in America. We're funding them to do work abroad. But now you've pumped them up on steroids with all this money. And now they're these big, bad, powerful organizations that simultaneously operate domestically. USAID is in the business, and heavy in the business, of controlling prosecutors and controlling media. It will shock the American people the proportion of global media that is controlled by, because it's sponsored by, USAID. It will also shock the American population when they find out how many of the world's prosecutors are effectively being manipulated or controlled by USAID. And a great example of this, because we are on the topic of how USAID's foreign money spigot is weaponized against domestic politics and domestic citizens. And crazy example of this is this group that I was beginning to mention called the OCCRP, the Corruption Reporting Project, which is the world's largest consortium of investigative journalists. These are the folks who broke the Panama Papers and a whole host of other scandals, which they conveniently only get access to because of leaked documents or hacked documents. While they're on the payroll of the CIA, they get access to the internal files of basically every enemy of the State Department's computers, which is a amazing coincidence if you think about it. But the Corruption Reporting Project gets half of its budget from USAID, and USAID gets editorial control. Effectively, they get control of hiring and firing who the Corruption Reporting Project can bring on. The Corruption Reporting Project has to submit an annual report to them before the year starts about what sort of things they're going to report on. And what they sicked them on doing was digging up dirt on Paul Manafort and his connection to Julian Assange. They wrote a false news story in order to tar President Trump and as a Russian asset and working with WikiLeaks. That was funded by USAID. Most horrendously, they targeted Rudy Giuliani. So USAID sponsored a group of hit piece journalists to dig up dirt on Rudy Giuliani, and that dirt was then used as the basis for the impeachment in 2019. It was entered into the record during the 2019 Ukraine impeachment because USAID sicked its sponsored hit piece journalists to dig up dirt on Rudy Giuliani's work in Ukraine, which they then tied to Trump in order to have him be impeached by Congress. So USAID was at war with Donald Trump and Trumpism and Trump's nationalist policy, both at home and abroad. And so what they did is they funded these dark arts, just the same way the CIA was in the 20th century would pay journalists to write hit pieces. That is now done by USAID. And in fact, in the USAID report on this program, they have an accomplishments section where they list all of the people. They brag that they got 456 people arrested because of CRP's hit pieces and the flow of those hit pieces to prosecutors. That is USAID bragging in their accomplishments section about paying journalists to get 456 people arrested, to get over $1 billion of assets seized. They bragged about the return on investment, that paying these hit piece journalists $20 million netted them over $1 billion in assets seized from the targets of the hit pieces. They even bragged that these hit piece journalists that they sponsored toppled world governments. They claimed that these hit pieces got, I think, 7 different major government officials to resign, including a president and a prime minister. And they also bragged about dozens of arrests that were done, that were achieved because of this. That is, hit pieces for hire in order to give prosecutors ammunition to arrest USAID's political enemies all over Central and Eastern Europe, all over Western Hemisphere, and most damningly in the United States of America itself.
So you brought the domestic international. And this is something that I was dying to ask you, Mike. Brazil, the lawfare against Jair Bolsonaro. The lawfare in France against populist leaders. The lawfare all across Eastern Europe against populist leaders. It all seems to be happening right now in coordination. And the charges are quite similar. Even in Pakistan, against Imran Khan. The charges all seem to be copy and pasted, and they all seem to be brought at exactly the same time as, of course, populist leaders rise to power, and there is a movement around the globe for more nationality and more national defense. How coordinated is that lawfare through USAID? Is there any connection?
Benny, USAID has a concept, an internal doctrinal concept called transitional justice, which is the idea that you need to arrest people when you topple a government. When you narrowly win an election, you immediately use the criminal justice system to arrest the people from the former government. USAID has something called the Office of Transition Initiatives, which helps coordinate that. Transition means a transition from one government to the next. So literally in the process of taking over a country's government, they weaponize the criminal justice system. They pay all of the groups around the prosecutors and gamify exactly how to get the prosecutors to take these steps, including through what I just mentioned, the Corruption Reporting Project, and USAID bragging that they got all these people arrested through that. They also fund the groups that lobby the prosecutors' associations. For example, they did that in Brazil, USAID did. But that's not like a random one-off isolated thing they do from time to time. It's a doctrinal concept. Everyone can look this up. Go to Google and type in transitional justice. It means means arrest. It means you arrest the USAID's enemies in the region. And you work with the prosecutors, you work with the media to devastate and isolate and demonize them, also to dig up dirt that can be used as the basis for criminal investigations. The rabbit hole on this goes so deep and so dark that I think a lot of people need to take a long walk and stare wistfully on a train ride 1,000 yards away to really internalize just how much of a Truman Show you have been living in with the people you think you know and the institutions you think you know really being a front for USAID.
I mean, this seems criminal. In it, like prima facie, that there are crimes that are right now being committed inside of USAID, and that everything from money laundering, which the Doge Group has been pretty front-facing about, $50 million to schools in Nigeria, but all the money ends up in Bethesda, Maryland. Not a single school gets built. And there's somebody that's going to be left holding the bag in that money laundering scheme. Clearly, there's no legal basis for USAID to be funding the imprisonment of populist candidates around the world who lose in very narrow, very, very suspicious elections like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil.
I wish that were the case. And I'll leave the criminal aspect of it to folks at the Justice Department and folks who specialize in criminal law. My concern is frankly the inverse of that, which is that these are authorized crimes in the same way that the intelligence community and the FBI are able to conduct what are called authorized crimes. That is, they have a blank check from the Justice Department. They have pre-clearance to engage in this because it's considered essential to U.S. national security or advancing U.S. national interest. For example, informants who conducting authorized crimes here in the U.S. There's like $500 million from the FBI alone. Virtually everything the CIA does in terms of working with oligarchs, crooked oligarchs, working with warlords, working with paramilitaries, working with terrorist groups, involves authorized crimes. And my concern is that USAID has been operating under this cloak with the Justice Department, and their operations have been greenlit through these secular channels at Justice. Because they are said to advance U.S. national interests. Of course, they don't. They advance the interests of a very small insular crew of U.S. elites who are the same people who have sought to imprison Donald Trump and destroy any attempt to make this country great again. But the fact is, and I stress this point because the urge to just take everything down at USAID, I totally agree with as a first step. But what you're going to quickly find is that USAID, and I hate to say this, but they are, I begrudgingly acknowledge that they are good at their job in the sense that if their job is to take down the people that they are deputized to in order to advance U.S. national interest. That is, in order to oust foreign governments. For example, you can credit USAID with toppling the governments of Tunisia and Egypt during the Arab Spring. You can credit them with toppling the government of Brazil in 2022. You can credit them with toppling the government of Bangladesh just 4 months ago in 2024.
What about Ukraine in 2014?
Unbelievable. Their role in Ukraine in 2014 was they provided the lion's share of that $5 billion that Victoria Nuland bragged about 2 months before the coup. That is, they capacity built these right sector Maidan Square student groups and protest movements. In fact, one of the things that I broke a year ago, but I put it back on X this week, was U.S. Special Forces training documents from Mark Milley and Joe Biden's tenure. This is the 2021 Special Forces vision statement prospectus, their strategic planning manual, which showed that when they organize race riots in Africa, they use USAID job fairs to provide no-show salaries to protesters so that they can go on strike and quit their jobs and still get paid, because USAID is paying them the money so that they can afford to leave their factory jobs to riot in the streets against their governments. And so USAID works not just with state, but they and not just with intelligence, but they work directly with the U.S. military. And in fact, one of these DOD reports from 2022 has a quote from a three-star general saying that he prefers to work with USAID over the State Department because, quote, USAID actually does stuff. They're the ones who are actually on the ground building the institutions that the military can work with. And so we need to do this smart. Like I said, this is open heart surgery, and Trump wants to win on foreign policy. Trump has designs for his plans in Europe, his designs for plans in Africa, where we get critical minerals, designs for plans in Western Hemisphere and Central Asia. And what you're going to find is that these are USAID is the arm for carrying out foreign policy, but it's gone rogue. But we're going to need to synchronize that with its new home at state, and that's going to be a whole other task. If I can just say one other thing, the analogy that I give here is Brexit. We all celebrated, in June 2016, when Nigel Farage pulled off that epic moment with Brexit against the full weight of world media and even the U.S. State Department trying to stop it, and the censorship and the demonization. But the fact is Brexit, as Farage himself acknowledges, did not really achieve the intended goals because of all the different layers of warfare in terms of implementing it. And you're going to find that same thing happen here. You shut down USAID and you move it to state. State just inherits a USAID herpes infection. It does not end USAID. You're going to need to manage that and do it very, very delicately.
Can we look into something in very recent history? And we talk about the lawfare against President Trump, but I would argue that the COVID-19 pandemic was the most damaging thing to ever happen to President Trump or his first term, without question, and possibly the most damaging thing to happen to the world in recent memory. $40 million from USAID through EcoHealth Alliance, directly tied to the Wuhan Virology Laboratory. But also there's more biolab funding in USAID, some having connections with Hunter Biden and Ukraine. Can you please unlock that for us, Mike? Because as you're talking about the dangers of this organization and what may still be metastasizing as herpes, as you put it, how do you shut down those programs? One, what are those programs intended to do in the first place? I'm not sure why we're funding biolabs, why that's USAID role. And then two, how do you kill that? How do you shut that down?
So one of the training exercises I would do for my ex-subscribers when we would pull up USAID grants is we would examine what the grant says and have people make a guess or determination about which role USAID is playing with the grant program. Because USAID is a switch player that toggles between assisting the State Department on foreign policy goals, the Defense Department on national security and military goals, and the Central Intelligence Agency in intelligence work. And so when you see a USAID grant, let me say this again, I've said it 1,000 times, in the past weekend alone, but there's not a single honest USAID program on God's green earth. Everything USAID does is a lie. And so when you see a USAID grant, you know it's a lie, but you don't know exactly the source of the lie. You don't know if they're lying to provide a covert operation on behalf of the State Department. You don't know if they're lying on behalf of a covert operation for DoD, or you don't know if they're lying because they're providing a covert operation as a liaison to the CIA. But you know it's one of those three. And my concern over the vaccine issues that you just mentioned, and their role in funding gain of function research, which is nominally done so that you can create a vaccine against freakazoid monster viruses, is that the CIA has played a really interesting role in vaccine diplomacy, and as has the State Department. Henry Kissinger in 2000 wrote a book talking about how American soft power has to radically upscale its role in public health interventions because they have proven successful in the 1990s to get the United States access to populations under a humanitarian cloak that we could not do under a military or diplomatic cover. And he gives examples in Yugoslavia during the Bosnia War and the breakup of Yugoslavia in 1995 and 1999. He gives the example of Haiti, and there's about 7 or 8 countries that he mentions there. I've posted all about this on X. And public health facilities and public health programs provide the perfect cover for that. And that's not my quote, by the way. That's USAID's quote. USAID in 2014 was busted running a fake HIV prevention program that served as the cover for undercover intelligence agents to recruit people to try to overthrow their government. Basically, they were operating this web of HIV prevention clinics, and then getting everyone in the clinic and running resources out of this in order to create a critical component of people to take to the streets to overthrow their government. This was busted by counterintelligence, and USAID had to come clean about it. It was a massive scandal. But the question is, if they were doing that with HIV prevention programs in Cuba and in other parts of Western Hemisphere, how many other public health facilities that USAID is running? How many other vaccine programs or public health programs is USAID running that are actually intelligence operations in the background? I would wager virtually every single one. And let me express another concern. And I mentioned this last night and in a few private live streams previously, but I'm going to keep banging it until someone takes note of it. There was a major scandal in 2011 where the CIA was busted running fake vaccination drives and fake vaccination clinics in Pakistan. This was a major, major diplomatic incident for the United States. Again, the CIA was collecting the biometrics of people in Pakistan under the cover of vaccination clinics and vaccination drives. And when the CIA got busted doing this, it was a major scandal. Pakistan kicked him out of the country, banned vaccine programs in the country. It took 16 months for the CIA after that scandal to write a letter, a pinky promise, non-binding, not under oath, no criminal punishments if they violate it, letter saying that they will no longer use vaccine clinics or vaccine drives as the cover for doing CIA work. Okay, 16 months of dragging them, 16 months of holding out, of reluctant, didn't want to do it, and they finally wrote a non-binding letter that they won't do it. Well, guess what? USAID is CIA, and USAID is not even under the pretense of that letter. I have a question. Hey, when the CIA in 2013 said that they're no longer going to do CIA work out of their vaccination clinics and vaccine drives, did USAID take the baton? Is USAID just doing it? And hey, guess what? Who was the top recipient of USAID funds last year? Gavi, the vaccine consortium under Bill Gates. So everything USAID is doing in this space, from funding the Wuhan lab and the CIA role in COVID, of course, Avril Haines, who was deputy director of the CIA, You played a key role in Event 201, which was the COVID simulator where they magically knew that a bat-based coronavirus was going to come out of China, and they had a worldwide simulation sponsored by the Gates Foundation, the Johns Hopkins Biosecurity Lab, and the World Economic Forum. But what was the deputy director of the CIA doing, coaching that whole room on the best way to censor the internet to stop conspiracy theories about man-made origins of a pending outbreak that would shut down the entire world just 2 months later? What was this? What were CIA and Pentagon front groups like the Atlantic Council and Graphica doing first to descend on the internet to censor all claims about COVID as being a man-made virus, while USAID was providing the funding in tandem with DARPA to actually create the basis for a spreadable bat-based coronavirus and the SARS-CoV-2, the inferrin cleavage cell biological basis for creating that strain. So the fact is USAID is CIA in that respect, and CIA has to manage biosecurity affairs when you're talking about these cloak and dagger things. And so it's very easy for them to weld an offensive weapon under the cloak of needing a defense against offense.
The rabbit hole does go deep, doesn't it, Mike? What are the what are some of the things that will shock people the most? Because I believe we're just at the tip of the iceberg here, and we finally reached at scale with USAID. Now it is mainstream. The White House is talking about it. The White House webpage just put up a fact sheet on USAID right now. You're seeing Democrats, of course, rally in the street to protect USAID. Glenn Greenwald saying, soon to come, the Democrat marches in favor of the CIA, right? It's like we're seeing now the agitation be created in order to try and defend USAID. One of the Vindman brothers trying to get into the building, Ilhan Omar saying she wouldn't be in America if it weren't for USAID. Not sure if that's the single greatest advertisement for shutting it down. But here we have the final cumulus point, nexus point for Democrats to unite around. Chuck Schumer going just hollering at the wind, screaming on social media about that. This was clearly the target. This is clearly the skeleton key to unlocking the apparatus that has been funding global leftism for quite a while in this country. And so, what must happen next in order to stop that from happening? What would be your advice to Elon Musk and the Trump administration? And two, are we even going to see a global left-wing movement as we've known it for the last 20 years without USAID? I mean, is this it?
So I know that's a very tempting framing, and I'm not disagreeing with it. The fact is 97% of employee contributions at USAID went to Democrats. Democrats do make up the lion's share by far of grantee money. But my main concern is actually not the Democrats in the USAID story. My main concern is the Republicans. And let me explain why. So USAID is the funding arm, but the operations arm of much of USAID work is the National Endowment for Democracy, which has two sister groups that it houses, one for Democrats, one for Republicans. NDI is the National Democratic Institute, is the Democrat one. Hunter Biden was on the chairman's advisory board of that, incidentally. And IRI, the International Republican Institute, is the Republican one. And they get approximately equal funding. And much of USAID work redounds to the benefit of legacy Republican donors and stakeholders, from the energy companies to the Chamber of Commerce companies. You know, when Victoria Nuland was bragging in December 2013 about the $5 billion that USAID had flooded into Ukrainian civil society that would then later be credited with taking down the Ukrainian government and installing a Victoria Nuland hand-picked new president. When she made that speech, she was standing in front of she was at a sponsored event, jointly sponsored by Exxon and Chevron. Exxon and Chevron are legacy Republican stalwarts. In fact, it was the chairman of the board of ExxonMobil who was Donald Trump's first Secretary of State before Mike Pompeo, Rex Tillerson. And so what you will, my concern, listen, if this was just a Democrat-Republican thing, there'd be no issue at all shutting this down because a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate would be highly incentivized to simply shut down the agency entirely. There'd be, not only would it, redound to U.S. national interests in their view, but even in a pure, cynical, self-serving fashion, they'd shut down the money spigot for the Democrats. But you're going to find that is not going to be an easy task, because the critical component of internationalist Republicans, of blob Republicans that are on the take of USAID, or their constituent corporations are, or their major donors are, the size of that rabbit hole, I think, will shock the American people. And my concern is those blob Republicans will form a coalition bloc with Democrats in order to stop Congress from shutting down USAID. All it takes is a handful of senators in order to block that from happening. We're running into this same issue when it comes to Senate confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard and potentially other Trump nominees. But in that case, that's not doing direct damage to the economics of those senators and congressmen. USAID shutting that down will. That is going to be a much harder fight. And I'm urging people, especially people who are conservative or Republican, to pay while you're watching Chuck Schumer and the Vindman brothers parade outside of USAID headquarters. I want you to pay very special attention to the Republicans who voice opposition to this, because that is going to open up a rabbit hole about the historical construction of the Republican Party, the same Republican Party that led the January 6th committee, crucifixion of Donald Trump, the Liz Cheney wing, the Adam Kinzinger wing, the Bush CIA family clan, and that is where the pressure has to be most acutely applied in terms of commitments to primary and fund the congressional opposition to them as this process plays out.
So obviously the sabotage from the right will be the largest hurdle for President Trump, and this has been true over the last 10 years, although it seems like those hurdles are falling in pretty quick succession, especially with some of these Republicans united to support Tulsi, getting Pete Hegseth over the line. Kash Patel looks like he's cruising. What should become of USAID? It's now under Marco Rubio's purview. Marco Rubio, in a clip that we played before you came on, Mike, is saying this was a government outside of the federal government. This was not even an American organization. This was like an international globalist left-wing organization. Can USAID be saved? What would be your advice to a Marco Rubio and to an Elon Musk right now with USAID?
I just have to respond to that framing, because USAID overthrows leftist governments all the time, all the livelong day. This is the problem. You have a right-wing nationalist government who does want influence over many leftist governments, as well as some right-wing nationalist governments. But this idea that framing it, if that's politically useful, whatever. I defer to people; they can say their own language on this. But as someone in the background of this, trying to help provide objective guidance on this, what you're gonna find is that a great example of this. I mentioned the overthrow of the democratically elected Bangladeshi government in September of this year. This is just 4 months ago. Sheikh Hasina, the democratically elected prime minister, was ousted in a coup that was led by the right-wing International Republican Institute at NED, also funded by a huge flood of USAID dollars. The Republicans were funding the transgender dance festivals. The Republicans were funding the woke DEI programs. The Republicans were funding Bangladeshi rap groups in order to write rap albums to get young people and student groups to take to the streets. They weren't doing that because they were woke. they were doing that because of Republican energy company interests in the region and how it redounds to the sponsors, the Chamber of Commerce stakeholders to USAID and NED, who are significantly Republican. And so my concern is that, we've not dented this thing yet. We've dented its reputation. We've sent a massive symbolic shot across the bow in the same way that the Brexit referendum vote did. But it is going to be trench warfare, layer by layer by layer by layer. And the exact same operations may be carried out. The exact same grants can simply be grafted over from USAID's democracy, rights, and governance to USAID's democracy, rights, and labor in the blink of an eye. USAID has matching institutions for matching bureaus for State Department bureaus. These things can just be, Control C, Control V, copy pasted directly into state. And you heard Marco Rubio even refer to the fact that many of these grants should be kept to the extent that they serve U.S. national interests. But that is a very broad brush. And, you cannot let off the gas on this for 1 second, or what looks like a triumphant moment now will go the same way that the course of Brexit did in the UK, resulting in the UK now being worse than ever under the total thumb of the UK Labour Party, who's arresting people for hitting the retweet button.
Yeah, so total abomination. Okay, so retweet, Twitter, Elon Musk, Chuck Schumer saying Elon Musk has no authority to be stepping in these organizations and doing oversight. Your response to that?
Well, Elon Musk is not doing anything on its own. You heard Donald Trump himself say that everything is being authorized and approved by Donald Trump himself. And in fact, Doge is not just some outside advisory group. They're now formally a part of the U.S. government. They've now occupied the White House digital office. This was a major event that got very little press, I feel. For 6 months now, everyone's been talking about Doge might be not powerful at all because it's not even going to be a part of the government. Well, now Doge is a part of the government. It has an office in the White House, and now they're saying it's too powerful. So this is the Goldilocks. The porridge is too cold and it's too hot. But the fact is the executive branch is authorized to do this, and now they're in the executive branch. So suck it.
AOC says Elon Musk just not smart. Just one.
Well, AOC started her career in USAID.
Yeah. Go down that rabbit hole, Mike. Just real fast.
Yeah. Yes. AOC's miracle career, where she was plucked, from one of a 10,000 person lottery to be the sponsored group of an NGO to make her way into Congress as just a bartender. Well, AOC, while she was at Boston University, was a participant in this highly political fast track program called, I believe it's called the Nyamin International Cultural Exchange Program. And this is, in the words of its own program, not your typical study abroad program, because it is a democracy promotion program parked out of Boston University, sponsored by USAID, and it is a political fast track that puts you directly in a sort of groomed position for international relations and foreign affairs job. In fact, one of AOC's cohorts and one of her classmates in that very same program became the head of USAID for the region. She was plucked, Benny, get this, she was plucked into Niger in 2009 at the absolute epicenter heart of a civil war, a military civil war that was happening in the region, where U.S. was already putting embargoes on the in-power government and organizing a military coup to oust that government, where they then would go on to write Niger's new constitution. And AOC was one of a small group of people who were descended on to liaise with the indigenous population there and put them basically into turn them into regime change activists. The only two courses in the study abroad program were social change and youth engagement activism. Basically, you could pick between teaching people how to overthrow their government or angering up the indigenous population for how to overthrow the government while the U.S. government was conducting an in-process regime change operation. And again, like I said, one of her classmates became the USAID ambassador to the region shortly thereafter.
So AOC is a USAID.
Liz Cheney started a career at USAID. It goes on and on and on. I call this the great USAID vortex of despair, which is that basically every major political and financial promoter of USAID is either directly on the take, indirectly on the take through one of the groups that they run, like Bill Kristol, or their sponsors and donors, their direct donors rely on it, like Jamie Raskin.
So AOC is a USAID plant.
Well, she's a USAID creation. I don't want to remove all agency because, think of it like a fellowship program. Many NGOs or many think tanks, they have fellowship programs where they bring you in, they teach you your ways, they connect you with mentors, the people who will open the doors for you throughout your political career. And as a fellow, you maintain relations with that organization and you do favors for the rest of your life. And this is how people make it in DC. They start in these incubator programs, they network with those people, they do favors for years. And so they are a trusted partner. They know when they nominate AOC to Congress, AOC is going to use her perch in Congress to keep the USAID money flowing because it was USAID who opened the door. So I don't want to go so far as to call it a plant or a cutout, but these are the how skids get greased in Washington. She's in network. She's in the club. She's a USAID network promoter, and what you find is that creates a massive conflict of interest when USAID is doing things that don't actually advance U.S. national interests, but advance the cloistered interests of that set because they've got their sponsors in Congress, like AOC.
So, Mike, I know we're up against a hard out, and I have a final question for you, and I think it sort of hits at the very heart of this issue because the people that you are seeing screaming in the streets, the rent-a-mobs that are back, you predicted it, Mike. You could set your watch by it, pal. The rent-a-mobs are back, and they're now protesting to keep USAID. I wasn't planning on this one. Maybe you were. How panicked right now is the corporatist Democrat Party in the reports that we're hearing? This is the single greatest victory that President Trump has ever achieved by cutting off the funding for USAID, and the sheer screeching and demonic screams about this. I mean, I haven't heard them like this since Kavanaugh, Mike. This is really something. This is really something. This is like Russiagate level of mobilization. How devastating is this when the funding gets cut off, and why is it that they were able to hide it for so long?
Well, what I'll say is you ain't seen nothing yet. If the screaming is loud now, just wait to see what's coming. Because the fact is USAID is not really actually, there's a funding pause, but USAID is fully funded through Q1, which means they still have the money that was dispersed through March 2025. So we're still a full month from them actually being hit by this funding pause. And so what they're doing right now is scrambling into action and building the consensus about the most twisted and sadistic path forward in order to stop that from happening, which is why I keep saying focus on the internationalist Republicans, because that is who they're going to run to Congress to stop this. It was the House, I believe it was the House Foreign Affairs Committee from their official X account who put out a formal tweet saying that Elon Musk can't do this. Well, guess what? It's Republicans running that Twitter account. There's a Republican majority. And my concern is in the same way that when the U.S. has historically gone into foreign countries in order to pull off a military coup, what they'll do is they'll back channel with a critical component, a critical quorum of military generals and get them to defect, that you're going to see the same thing with Democrats moving over to Republicans, offering them money, offering them favors in order to defect from Mike Johnson, defect from Donald Trump, defect from Elon, and move into a coalition block, a majority coalition block, in order to stop this from happening, in order to keep the funds flowing, or in order to make sure that the reforms that are put in at state effectively keep, what I'm indelicately calling the USAID herpes infection that it will inherit.
How deep does the rabbit hole go, Mike? In conclusion, what's next? Predict the future. You've done it a million times on this program. You're Benz Stradamus. I think we even have some graphics of you as Nostradamus. What will be found next here with USAID? Where does the rabbit hole go?
Well, the rabbit hole is mind-bending. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. What people will find is that they've been living their entire lives in a Truman Show, where every person they think that they've met or they think they know, or every institution they think they know is in either in large or in small part a USAID concoction, from the media to social media censorship algorithms, to prosecutors, to universities, to unions, to public health institutions, to coalitions within political parties, you name it. Every institution in society is inflected by the influence of USAID. What I'll say in my particular focus is restoring freedom on the internet, restoring freedom of speech online. And one of the main focuses of the investigative journalism work that I do over the next few months is going to be fully revealing the role of USAID in censoring the internet and in control over media, and as well the role of USAID in treasonously betraying the United States of America by working with foreign governments and paying and funding and pressuring and coordinating with foreign governments for them to pass internet censorship laws in order to devastate U.S. social media companies like X or Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook or YouTube, in order for USAID to be able to have control over what people can and can't say on the internet, which then determines the results of elections, which then determines the constitution of governments. And so that, to me, is an immediate issue that needs to be at the forefront of Americans' minds, and also has to be fully understood by American diplomats as they do battle with the European Union and its censorship laws, as they do battle with the UK and its censorship laws, as they do battle with Brazil and its censorship laws, battle with Australia and its censorship laws. Because what they're going to find is, as they're negotiating with foreign countries in terms of the rules of the road for the internet, they're going to find that the people on the other side of the table are not just foreign people and foreign governments. They're going to find members of their own USAID.